This morning, in light of a really emotionally rich Torah portion that we had, I want to talk about something which I believe we all think about from time to time when we are feeling self-reflective, and that is, what does it mean for us to grow emotionally? What does it mean for us to experience emotional growth? And I want to say two things about emotional growth. First, it is painful to grow spiritually, emotionally. And second of all, there is no greater blessing that a human being can have than the blessing that comes from hard-earned emotional growth over the course of our lives. When I was in college, I took a class in German literature in translation. I knew a little bit of German, not enough to read these classics. And we read one classic by Thomas Mann called Confessions of Felix Kroll. Now, there is actually a single German word, and there are people here who speak German fluently, so I'm going to tread carefully. There is a single German word that means a novel about coming of age. And that word, in case it comes up in a crossword puzzle, is Bildungsroman. So this was that kind of novel. And what's amazing about the Torah is that the Torah actually contains several of these kinds of stories that are interwoven. The Torah will talk about the coming of age of certain of its main figures, including Abraham, including Isaac, including Moses. And in this week's parashah, we see major episodes in the coming of age, the life trajectory, the emotional growth of Yaakov Avinu, of Jacob, our father. And I want to unpack that a little and ask us to think about our own hard-won emotional growth. So we know that Jacob is about to meet up with his brother Esau. And we know that there is a great deal of tension. And we know that when Jacob was younger, he was a trickster. Yaakov has to do with tricking. But now he is engaged in this struggle with an Ish. He understands that there is a divine element to this Ish. He strives with the Ish, with this individual, all night long. And then ultimately he says, I saw God's face. Ki ra'iti Elohim panim el panim. I saw God directly face to face, and ultimately I was saved. And the individual gives Jacob a new name, Yisrael, ki sarita im Elohim ve'im anashim vatuchal. You are going to be called wrestler. You're going to be called striver because you struggled with human beings and with the divine, and you prevailed. So I want us to understand the emotional growth that this represents. So as I said, Jacob is known as Yaakov, the person first who holds on to the heel, Akev, because Esau, his twin brother, was born a little bit before. So you imagine him hanging on to the heel of his brother as he is being born. And then Akev can also mean to trick, to subvert. And so this is his MO when he's younger. He hangs on and then he overcomes, sometimes through questionable means. And this is a moment of emotional growth. This isn't a moment of transformation because he's being told, yes, you're going to struggle, but it's going to be out in the open. It's going to be for a higher purpose. And you now are accountable to other people in a way that you weren't when you were much younger. So his identity changes. And here's the thing. It's painful because he limps afterwards. He retains the effects of this moment that represents his emotional growth, because growth often is painful. However, it's also a blessing. When Jacob says to the Ish, to the individual, I will not let go of you until you bless me, that's when the individual gives Jacob the new name. Jacob will experience his growth as a blessing. He will become the father of the entire people who will be called the children of Israel. That is his hard-won, painful growth, new identity. So a couple things. First of all, growth occurs over time. We don't just wake up one morning and all of a sudden we have extraordinary insight and maturity. It happens step by step over the course of a lifetime. And not only that, but growth can sometimes be difficult for us to adjust to. The new person that we are, by virtue of facing our challenges appropriately, sometimes requires effort for us to acknowledge and for us to recognize. So, folks, I want you to do some self-reflection with me. I want you to think about your own emotional growth. I want you to consider if there were times in your life when you felt like you were wrestling, when you felt like you were being stretched, when you felt like you were being invited, painful though it was, to get yourself to a different place. It could have been during a time of loss. It could have been as you were establishing yourself professionally, or perhaps a new relationship that became part of your life. And it can also happen when you're younger. So we have a whole bunch of middle schoolers here. That's a time of growth. When you do something that you don't think you can, when you face a bully who chances are is suffering even more than you are, which is why they're a bully, and you decide that you're going to stand up and you are not going to crumble, all of that constitutes emotional growth. And I want us to think about not only the pain, but the blessing. Who benefited from us becoming stronger, becoming wiser? Who benefited from us catapulting to a place of greater self-awareness and greater capacity? I want to give a profound example from something which is very much on our minds. So we know that the hostages who were in Gaza, anywhere from months to years, are sharing their stories of captivity, and they are agonizing to hear. And the pain that they are experiencing is incomprehensible on so many levels. But we're learning through what they share about the incredible fortitude and strength that they gave, but also received. So I want to share one instance. I've spoken before about Alon Ohel, who was 22 years old when he was captured, a pianist who was at the concert, who was wounded in his eye, which will hopefully, God willing, be repaired, chained and starved and abused. And he often, for much of his captivity, was alone, but there were periods when he was with an individual, Rabbi, 51 at the time that he was captured. And what Alon said is that Eli served for him as a kind of a father. He said he was a kid when he was abducted, 22 years old. And there was one time when he was so frustrated with not having enough to eat that he punched his hand into a wall, which is something that many 22-year-olds have thought about doing, and some have actually done, and all of us perhaps can relate. And he said in that moment, Eli Sharabi hugged him and said to him, "It's going to be okay." And Alon said about Eli, he would hold me and lift me up. He carried himself and me on his back. So he experienced the blessing of Eli Sharabi's mature, fatherly love and strength. Now, thank God we are different at 51 than we are at 22. Thank God across the lifespan we continue to grow emotionally and spiritually. Thank God that we can be on the giving end and the receiving end of the blessing that comes from hard-won emotional growth. So I want to just share a few final thoughts. First of all, if we're open to it, we never stop growing. We never stop growing. I was sitting once with a B'nai Mitzvah family, and I asked the Bar Mitzvah, tell me something that your parents understand well that you don't understand so well. And he thought about it, and he was able to come up with something. And then I turned to the parents, and I said, tell me something that your parents understand well that you don't think that you understand well. I was inviting each individual to look ahead on the growth trajectory. Now, obviously, that's a hard thing to do. It's like asking a dot what it thinks about a line, or asking a line what it thinks about a sphere. It's hard to hurl yourself out of the emotional and cognitive space where you are, but I invited them to do it, and when they did, they understood, wow, life is all about growth from our youngest age to our final days. And the final thing that I want to say is that just because we grow as we get older doesn't mean we have to completely give up the spark or even the snark that comes with youth. In fact, notwithstanding what the Ish said to Jacob, he continues to be called Jacob, not just Yisrael. And at the end of his life, he's going to cross his hands because he wants to make sure that the younger gets the better blessing. So he's still carrying with him some of that trickiness that he had when he was a kid. But he's doing it with greater depth, with greater perspective. And so just because we are learning and growing doesn't mean we have to lose sight of the foundation of who we are. I wish each and every one of us a lifetime filled with emotional growth that is hard-won, but also uplifting. V'nivrachu banu kol mishpechot ha'adama, so that we will be able to offer ourselves and each other the blessings that emerge from our growth. Shabbat Shalom.